All right, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Butler. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Very excited to have this Facebook Live today. There's kind of a few things going on today that all tie in, but one of the main reasons that we are here and here with Diane Burrows, the co-president of the League of Women Voters of New York City. I keep trying to make sure I say that right. But we're here to, amongst a few other things, talk about the big election that is going on now. The official election day is June 22nd, but early voting has already started here in New York City. I feel like we barely got out of talking about the general election, and now here in New York, certainly we have a big election going on, but we're not the only place in the country. Off-cycle or non-presidential elections, I think, are often overlooked by a vast majority of the public. It's a big one for New York City, which is why I'm really excited to have Diane here to talk with us today about this. She's got a presentation. I'm going to give you a minute here to introduce yourself, but before I toss it over to you, Diane, I do want to say a couple other things. One, happy birthday to the United States Army. Today is, I think it's their 246th birthday, so happy birthday to everyone from the Army. It's also Flag Day, which is why Diane and I thought that today was a good day to do this Facebook Live. Flag Day is kind of one of those days I think that often gets overlooked. What do? You talk about the flag. People aren't really sure what to do, but I think anytime you're talking about something related to patriotism, to our country, I think tying it back to voting makes sense. I think that kind of underpins everything that this country is about. It's about what the revolution was about. It's really continues to be something that's debated highly today, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of that, but lots of reasons why we wanted to do this. So with that, Diane, thank you again for being here. I'm going to throw it over to you for a better introduction than I did of yourself and your organization and the national version of your organization. There's a lot of different layers I know about it. So with that, I'll stop talking, and Diane, thank you for being here.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And I'm just showing off to Jeremy because I got my I voted early bracelet this weekend because I did vote early, but thank you for having me. The League of Women Voters nationally is actually a 102-year-old organization, and the New York City chapter, we are just as old, 102 years. And what we've been doing for 102 years is exactly what Jeremy's been talking about, and that is voter engagement, civic engagement, election reform, all of these things that are so important. And what we do is we advocate, we lobby. New York City League of Women Voters, we lobby and advocate with the city government, so city council, and our national organization does the same nationally. So we're very involved, for example, in a lot of the voter suppression cases that are happening right now across the country. There's also, every state has a state league who does the exact same work with the state legislature. So, and we've been doing this, as I said, for over 100 years. So very powerful work. We're a volunteer organization. We have very few paid staff. The state has a paid lobbyist, but all of us lobby as volunteers. So that's really important to know also. So I think we're ready to get started.
Excellent. Well, what we're going to do, let me first, I always forget to say this, but we're certainly taking questions. So please, if people are watching on Facebook, please put in any questions that you have, anything that you want more information of. We got folks behind the scenes that are tracking that. If questions pop in, they'll let me know and we'll take those questions, we'll address them. We'll also drop in links to things that we're talking about throughout this whole conversation. But a quick overview of what we're going to do. Diane's going to do a little presentation that's really specific to the New York City election that is going on now. That said, if you're not in New York City, don't despair. Please stay with us because I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today really does affect everyone nationally. You know, Diane just mentioned a lot of the things that the League of Women Voters are doing, and it's relevant across the country, though not just here. But there's some really interesting things happening with this ongoing New York City election that I think could portend positive changes for the rest of the country as well. So I think any voter anywhere is going to be interested in this. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Diane is going to run through some slides. We'll talk over them as well. And again, please don't hesitate to throw in any questions that you might have into the question box. All right. Here we go. I think I'm sharing and I'll go to full
perfect.
screen.
That's right where we need to be. Great. So really, you know, as you just said, Jeremy, you know, this is important for the entire country because politics is local. Everybody knows that. Politics are local. Our concerns on a local level are the most important concerns. And yes, every 4 years we elect a president, we elect, national government, but it's really on the local level that impacts us the most. And this goes for any locality, any municipality. What are your concerns right now? You might be concerned about housing, policing, transportation, garbage pickup, playgrounds. All of these things affect us in our day-to-day lives, and that's all based on local elections. So what we're going to talk about is how can we affect change, not just in the city, but all over the country. Let's go to the next slide, please. So really it comes down to power, right? Who has the power? And the bottom line is we do. We have the power when we vote for elected officials based upon their ability to do the job. And that's what we have to do as voters. That's our responsibility, is to really find out what is their ability to do the job. Next slide, please. So again, why is this so important? The problem is when people don't vote, there's no accountability for elected officials. The power concentrates in the hands of a few people who do vote. Minority communities are greatly harmed if underserved communities are not out there voting. If you think about this, elected officials, just like all of us at the League of Women Voters or any citizen, voting records, not who you vote for, but the fact that you actually go and vote is public record. So every elected official knows how many people vote in their district, and they are going to pay attention. If I know as a politician that this particular section of my district are all voters, I'm going to be attentive to them because I want their vote the next time around. If another area of my district are non-voters, how much attention am I going to pay to them? So really, we've got to hold them accountable by making sure we get out and vote. Conversely, when people are engaged, then we have accountability, decisions are transparent, and all community, the entire community, has a voice in the decision-making process. There's a fabulous website that's called, I have it posted here for you, 2020 Worst Landlord Watch List. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This was a watch list put together by the public advocate in New York City, showing a map of New York City. And when you hover over the little black dots on the map, it takes you to who the landlord of that building is, how many violations they have, how many tenants are in that building. And so again, it creates a sense of transparency when we hold our elected officials accountable. Next slide, please.
And real quick, before I click to the next one,
Yeah.
I'll throw out there for folks that are watching, we'll put that link to the 2020 Worst Landlord Watch List in the, or actually I'll ask Victor too, who's managing things behind the scenes, drop that in there so folks can take a look at that.
Great, thank you. So, so many times, and I think certainly over the course of these last few years, we hear here at the League of Women Voters, and everybody, I'm sure you've heard this too, and honestly, you might be one of the people making these comments. When people doubt the power of their vote and they doubt the way that their voice can be heard, very often we hear comments like this, my vote doesn't count. They're all crooks. I don't even know what, nobody knows what they're talking about. They've never helped me. All of these expressions of frustration, of alienation, of disenfranchisement, these are all real. And people feel that. And what we have to do is really advocate on the part of, if you are involved and if you are civically engaged, these concerns can go away and these concerns can be addressed. One of my favorite responses to these sorts of feelings of frustration and disenfranchisement is the very first one up here. If your vote doesn't count, why is it that so many legislators try to restrict us? If it didn't count, why are they working so hard to stop us from voting? And I think that's a really powerful response to this, because We know the vote really matters, and we also know it because so many people right now are trying to suppress the vote. And I think that when we advocate for voting and for open voting rights, we have the ability to put people in power who are going to represent our interests, whatever your interests are, to think about how we can do that. One of the concerns that we often see from people who have been involved in various movements, for example, Black Lives Matter movement over the past, certainly long time, but kind of culminating in what happened this past summer, we've discovered that so many folks are involved in demonstrating and getting out there and expressing their opinion, but then not voting. And what we like to say is, yeah, marching is super important. Protesting is super important on your way to vote. When you vote, that's when your voice is heard the loudest. Knowledge is power. And when we vote, we can change things. And we've proved that in many, many elections. Next slide, please. So these are some ways you could use the power of your voice, obviously voting, but also, we advocate for people, like I said, marching in demonstrations, postcarding, phone banking, social media outreach is huge. And we've really, during the pandemic, have discovered the power of social media. I mean, I guess we've known it, but through the pandemic, we feel that this has been a remarkable way to reach people. Doing voter registration drives, advocacy and lobbying of your legislators, educational programs like we're doing right now, and then civic engagement activities where you build coalitions with like-minded organizations. And certainly working through your organization, think about other organizations that share your values, share your interests, and form coalitions. Because again, it's power of our voices. And the more voices we put together, the more power we have. So let's think about this. Let's think about now focusing on New York City. What we're going to try to do today, when we think about New York City and the election that we're facing right now, is where is the power in New York City? What are the limitations of power? And what are the unique toolboxes and roles and responsibilities of each of these elected officials seen here, who we are going to be electing in this cycle? Again, it's all local. It's all about local. And we're going to come to understand the roles and responsibilities of these elected officials so that when you go to vote, you can make an informed and effective decision. Remember, and this is really important when you think local, it's all about local and it's all about follow the money, because it's the city who creates the budget. Actually, as we'll see in a minute, it's the mayor who creates the budget. And whether we're in a time of surplus or whether we're in a time of budget cutting, it's all about city government determining how those dollars get spent and where those dollars get spent. So as a voter, it's really important to understand the priorities of these various elected officials. Next slide, please. So in New York City, interestingly, in this election, this primary election, and actually into the general election too, your ballot is going to look different based on where you live, because obviously you vote where you're represented. So if you live in Queens, your ballot is going to look different than somebody who lives in Brooklyn. The top of the ballot is going to be the same. Everybody in New York City is going to be voting for the mayor, the comptroller, and the public advocate. That's the top of the ballot. Below that, as we'll see in a couple of minutes, your ballot will look different. So that's why in New York City, you must vote where you live. And you can check that by going to the Board of Elections website, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes also. So let's start by just talking about the mayor. We can go to that next slide, please. So the mayor actually has an enormous amount of power based upon the city charter. And the city charter is really like the Constitution for the city of New York. The mayor gets to appoint the heads of most agencies, including the commissioners of health, fire, police, and sanitation. The mayor approves or vetoes any bill that comes out of the city council. The mayor proposes the budget every year to the city council every spring. The mayor determines and creates a long-term strategic plan for the city to help the city grow in a long-term sort of way. And of course, we know now, coming out of the pandemic, we really need to see what are these mayoral candidates saying about their long-term strategic plans. And the mayor gets to create new agencies and also abolish agencies that are no longer needed. So that's really a very powerful job for the mayor of New York City. Let's go to the next slide, please. The other all-city role that we're going to be voting for is the comptroller. And the role and responsibility and power of the comptroller is really about the money. The comptroller's power is the power to audit. And the comptroller is the one who really has to make sure that the budget is affordable, that the mayor and the city council are being cognizant of the financial conditions of the city. It's interesting that the comptroller is elected so that the comptroller is independent of the mayor and the city council. The comptroller also investigates any matter relating to the city finances. It's really, this role is really sort of the caretaker of the city's money and the checkbook. And there's actually another website that you can go to, which is checkbooknyc.com, which is literally real time, as if you were peeking into New York City's checkbook. And you can click on it, it'll show you revenue, it'll show you salaries, it'll show you everything for the whole city. So again, another way that the city has to be transparent. The comptroller also is responsible for watching for any signs of corruption in any of the city agencies or in any of the city contracts. So really, really an important position, totally focused on finance. Next slide, please. The third all-city elected official is the public advocate. And the power of the public advocate is really in subpoena power. If you think about the public advocate, it's literally exactly what the name says. They advocate for the public. Think of them as sort of the eyes, ears, and mouth of the city. They monitor, investigate, and respond to citizen complaints. The public advocate monitors all public information and any complaint from around the city. And that's the one, it's the public advocate's office who did the worst landlord list that we referred to earlier. They attempt not only just to listen to all the complaints, but they attempt to resolve the complaints. And the public advocate looks for patterns in complaints. So for example, a specific landlord, for example. The public advocate can hold public hearings on the performance of city agencies to make sure they're providing what they promise to provide. The public advocate does not have a vote in the city council, but they can introduce legislation and they must report to the city council every year. The public advocate also chairs the Committee on Public Information and Communication and appoints a member to the City Planning Commission. So again, very powerful work. Next slide, please. So those were the three citywide elected officials that are going to be on everybody's ballot. Then we turn to what we call the borough-wide elected. And here's where your ballot is going to look different than mine, for example, because every borough is going to elect their own borough president. Each district within the borough is going to elect a city council member. And each borough also has a district attorney. Now, in this election, it's only the Manhattan district attorney who's up for election, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's turn our attention first to the city council. So next slide, please. So the power of the city council is the power to pass laws. And they actually get to pass laws in two different ways. First way, they can pass a law that literally changes the city charter that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, kind of like the Constitution. So for example, the fact that we're doing ranked choice voting is a direct result of something the city council passed a couple years ago. The other kind of law that the city council can pass is any law that applies just to the city. So for example, traffic laws. Any traffic law that applies just to New York City, the city council can do. They passed a law recently about solar panels on rooftops for city builds. So that's something they can do. Okay, so the city council gets to approve or disapprove the budget as proposed by the mayor. It can approve or disapprove the city planning commission's land use decisions in terms of zoning, housing, urban renewal plans, any project, they get to approve that. They investigate any matter related to property or governance, including participation of minority and women-owned businesses in the procurement process, which is hugely important. And they have to approve certain agency heads. So for example, the Board of Elections, Board of Health, Tax Commission, they have to approve that commissioner. And they're also really responsible for helping their constituents navigate city services. So if you're a constituent of a particular city council person, they have to help you if you need help getting certain services that you're entitled to. They also do something that's really interesting called participatory budgeting. And what this is every city council person can take up to $1 million out of the budget that they've been allocated. And they can invite their community to come together as a community and decide how to spend $1 million in the community. So they can do things like decide they want to upgrade a park or a library or a playground or something to do with public housing or community spaces. And they vote on it as a community, and it is funded by the city council person. So when you're thinking about voting this time around, for those of you in New York City, make sure that your city council person has been actively involved in participatory budgeting, because that's a way, again, for our voice to be heard more powerfully. Next slide, please. The borough president. Now, the borough president's power is really in the delivery of services rather than finance. If you don't live in New York City, the borough president sort of functions like county executives do in other counties in New York. They have to be consulted by the mayor and the city council on any money that's going to be spent in their borough. They get to propose legislation and budgetary expenditures for their borough. They get to allocate discretionary spending. They get to review all land use decisions that affect their borough. So any new housing build, any new businesses coming in, they have to approve that land use. They coordinate the citizen complaints with their fellow council members and with community board members, and more on that in a second. And they get to appoint one member of the Department of Education and the City Planning Commission. So again, a very powerful office. Now, community boards are another way for ordinary people like us to get involved on the borough level. The community boards are formed and appointed by the borough president. And as a person living in that community, all you have to do is go online to the borough president's website and apply to be on the community board. Now, the community boards do not align with any specific city council district because they haven't been redistricted, but they represent up to 250,000 people. And even though they don't have specific power, they do have a lot of power because they recommend projects to the borough president, who then in turn will recommend those projects to the city council. So for example, things like bike lanes or pothole repair or tree planting and green spaces. These are some things that community boards have had a lot of power over. Snow removal. If a community in particular has not had good snow removal or trash removal, that would be something the community board would organize about and go to the borough president and have it addressed. So again, the power of the individual citizen is really strong. Oh, and also, you don't even have to be a citizen to serve on the community board. You just have to be a resident of that community. Next slide, please. I just wanted to very briefly touch on the district attorney. This is only, I mean, obviously every borough has a district attorney, but the district attorney actually is the only one of these offices that I've been discussing that has no term limits. All of the other positions are all term limited, which limits their power. All the other officials are term limited to 2 consecutive 4-year terms. So they can serve 8 consecutive years. Now, interestingly, the city council in this election, because of, we had the census last year and we're going to redistrict this year. This year, the city council will only serve a 2-year term, and then they can run again for a second 2-year term, which of course might be slightly different borders and boundaries. And then they could run for a 4-year term following that. But the DA has no term limits. So we get to vote for them, and keep in mind, they are not term limited. They also are actually very, very powerful because they are the chief law enforcement officer for their borough. They do not have to wait for the police in that borough to address an issue. They can investigate a criminal behavior or an issue without the police being involved in it from the start. So the assistant district attorneys are appointed, hired by the district attorney, but we do vote for our district attorney. So interesting to follow that. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about a new way of voting in New York City this season. And this is ranked choice voting. And as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, this came out of the city council a couple years ago. It was voted on by New Yorkers in 2019. It passed, and we are using this. Now we're using this for all of the races I've just described, except not the DA, because this is New York City only. And technically the DA is a state official, judicial branch. So we're only voting for legislative and executive positions that are New York City. Now, here's the way it works. Your ballot is going to look different. It's going to look like this. The candidates are listed down the side, and then you get 5 rankings going across. You, as the voter, have to use everything that I really just talked about. You know, what is the office? What responsibilities, roles, and power does this office have? Who do I think as a voter is going to do the best job? In this scenario, for example, I really like candidate B. Candidate B believes in everything I believe in. I think this candidate is up to the work. Candidate C is pretty close. I could live with candidate C. And that's kind of the thinking that you do in your head is, yeah, I can live with candidate C. Candidate C is a really strong candidate. Candidate A, yep, I can live with candidate A. Strong candidate, that'll be my 3rd ranking, and on. And you don't have to, but you actually can select up to 5 of the candidates running for that office, but only the ones you could live with, that you could really support. Next slide, please. So how is it all going to be counted? And there's been a lot of conversation about this, and let me try to explain it. Let's imagine for a minute, we've all voted. We've all chosen our 3, 4, 5 candidates that we believe can really do the job. All the ballots go to the Board of Elections. Everybody's first choice ranking only are totaled up, and this will be reported. So everybody's first choice rankings are totaled up, and let's imagine this scenario. Candidate A ended up with 16% of all the first choice rank. Candidate B, 54%. Candidate C, 22%. Candidate D, 8%. In this scenario, because candidate B earned over 50% plus 1 of the first choice rankings, the election's over, candidate B wins. Okay, that's the end of this election. Next slide, please. However, we kind of expect this scenario for a lot of the races. And this scenario is same start, all the ballots are sent in, everything is counted up, first choice ranking only. And in this scenario, candidate A has 27% of all first choice rank, candidate B 39, C 22, D 12. Now in this scenario, nobody made it to that 50% plus one threshold. So now we start ranked choice voting rounds, and that's what they're actually calling it, is rounds. So what happens is the lowest first choice vote getter is eliminated. Next slide, please. So in this scenario, we eliminate candidate D. Now here's where your voice as a voter is so powerful. Because of ranked choice voting, look at this scenario. Let's imagine I voted for candidate D for my first choice. My first choice is eliminated. But because I had a second choice and a third choice, and maybe a fourth and fifth choice, my ballot is still on the table. Because even though my first choice was eliminated, my ballot now goes to my second choice candidate. So let's imagine I vote for candidate C for my second choice. So my ballot now goes to candidate C. Maybe another voter voted candidate A for second choice or candidate B for second choice. So now all of those second choice votes are tallied up and added to the candidate that was your second choice. So now we recalibrate and we take a look. Okay, candidate A is now at 31, candidate B at 45, candidate C at 24%. Now, these rounds have to keep going until there are 2 candidates left. So think about this for a minute. You know, in the mayoral race, this is going to take a lot of rounds. But for the scenario here, I kept it just pretty straightforward. In this scenario, we obviously now eliminate candidate C because candidate C is the lowest vote getter. So let's go to the next slide, please. So now we've eliminated candidate D, who let's imagine was my first choice. Candidate C was my second choice. Candidate C is now eliminated, but my voice can still be heard and I still have power as a voter because I had a third choice of somebody I could absolutely live with as my elected official. So let's imagine my third choice was candidate B. So my ballot now passes over to candidate B. Some people maybe voted for candidate A. Their third choice goes there. Now, because in my scenario, we are now down to the 2 final candidates, we can see candidate B wins this election. Next slide, please. Okay, well, let's go back. Let's go back. I didn't mean for us to go that far yet. Hang on. Okay, so thank you. So this is the way it gets totaled up. The important thing that I think for us to think about, again, going back to the beginning of this presentation, the power that we have as voters, this keeps your ballot in play, it keeps your voice being heard, and the more candidates you can live with, the stronger your voice remains through the process. Whoever wins the primary will then obviously go into the general election in November as the candidate from that political party. In this case, to be the Democratic Party. Okay? So I also just wanted to share a couple important resources. I told you about the Checkbook NYC, but over on this side, the Board of Elections website, and I just very briefly mentioned this, is a very, very important website for information. And the website is simply vote.nyc. And you can check where your poll site is. You can check to see that your registration is in good shape. You can check and see a sample ballot. You can find the hours of early voting. You can apply for an absentee ballot. It's actually, you have till tomorrow on that to apply for an absentee ballot online. Tomorrow is the deadline. Also our website, which is just LWVNYC.org, but this will take you to us. And again, we provide lots of workshops and trainings and information to help you navigate the election seasons. So with that, we could stop screen sharing. There we are. Terrific. Oh, you're on mute, Jeremy.
There we go. Yeah, I was saying out loud, I need to unmute. Excellent. No, Diane, that was great. So I've lived in New York City now for almost 6 years, and it's shocking how little I have known about New York City government. I think it's complex. It's very unique in many ways compared to the rest of the country. And that was a great breakdown. I think really highlighted a few key things. I know I'm already hearing from Victor that we've got a few questions.
Right.
Let me just start off with one though, and maybe it's more of a clarification. So with ranked choice voting, and really everyone's kind of talking about it around the mayoral race. You correctly pointed out that other than the DA, it's actually taking part in all these elections. But in terms of thinking about the mayoral race, so if no one gets over 50% plus one in that first round, did you say that they'll continue the rounds all the way till there are only two candidates?
Exactly.
Even if someone achieves that 50 plus one threshold, maybe after round 2 or 3, is that correct?
Correct. The idea is, and actually, I love this idea because it really elevates the democratic aspect of this. The idea is you keep going till there's 2 candidates left so that everybody's voice is heard for as long as their ballot is in play. So as long as you can keep going till you get to the last 2 candidates, then our voices are heard. And that's why it's important to rank as many of the candidates as you can be happy with. If you can't be happy with that particular candidate, don't rank them. Only rank the ones you really would be able to support.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't know that. I voted yesterday as well, or no, actually on Saturday. I didn't get the wristband that Diane got. I'm not happy about that. I didn't even get a sticker, but that was my own fault. Anyway, I did use all 5 spots, but I was kind of debating about that because I didn't understand going in that they would push it on that far if it goes there. So I think that's really important for people to know to use all those available spots. And one of the things I do want to add before we get to the questions that we've gotten on board is that ranked choice voting isn't new. It's new to New York City, but it's not even new to the U.S. I think it started in Maine, perhaps.
Yeah, it's been in Maine. Also, a lot of the East Bay in California have been using it, Oakland specifically. Also, Minneapolis has been using it for a while. The interesting thing, I happen to have one of my daughters and family live in Oakland, and they've been using ranked choice voting for a while. And the thing that they love about it is the candidates have finally figured out, New York City candidates haven't figured this out yet, that they form coalitions and they actually run commercials with, let's say, 3 candidates talking about a particular issue and saying, we all agree on this issue. Why don't you rank us your first, second, and third choice? And so they've started to realize that it's to their best interest to form these coalitions and unify around particular issues because that elevates the issue and it gives, let's say, that particular community more of an opportunity to be heard because chances are one of them is going to get elected.
And maybe even then it also adds to the civilizing effect of the campaigns because you realize that attacking isn't going to necessarily work for you as well. That's great. Well, awesome. I'll stop. Victor, over to you with some questions that we got.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. This question is for Diane. It seems that ranked choice voting is a win-win for everyone, the voter and the potential elected official. In your opinion, are there any challenges around ranked choice voting that we should know about?
I think the biggest challenge is we're overcoming it right now at this exact moment, and that is education. I think that we really have an obligation, and we've been doing this for a long time now, of educating people to how to use a ranked choice vote ballot strategically, the way that we've just been talking about. And I think that's really the biggest challenge, but we're doing it. And I see, from just the trainings that we've been doing and all the other good government groups have been doing, and I've noticed it now on the bus stops are now promoting ranked choice voting. And even when you go to vote, let's see if I have mine sitting here, everybody should have gotten this in the mail. So this again goes to all registered voters, and you can read about ranked choice voting in there. So I think that's the biggest barrier, but something we can overcome.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you so much.
sorry, Victor, before you go on, because I'm glad that question was asked, because that was something that early on I heard some of, and the more specific criticism, which I never quite understood or bought into, was that somehow ranked choice voting was going to disenfranchise or perhaps make it less valuable for minority voters. And I don't know if that was just an attempt by some to try and talk down about the idea of ranked choice voting or whatever it was, but it seemed to me that that was never a legitimate argument.
I agree with you. I think that in a lot of ways, again, using strategic use of ranked choice voting, that when you think about how you're going to use your 5 choices, if you are a member of any particular community and you want to see that particular community elevated by having an elected official represent you, then you're not just having to vote for one. You can vote for 3 or 4 people who represent your community, giving greater likelihood to somebody representing you and your interests to be elected. So I see it. I agree with you, Jeremy.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Victor, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. This question is for both of you. Would you recommend someone starting out in local New York City politics who may want to run for local elected office to join their community board first?
Yes, absolutely. When you join the community board, you find out what's happening on the ground, and you're involved in the everyday lives of people in your community. And then when you're involved in that, then you get involved in your local political club. So each community in the city has a political club. You get involved with that. And they offer like classes in how to run for office. And that's a great way to get started politically, and totally applaud people for wanting to do that.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I said, I've been learning ever since I got here. I moved to New York City from Washington, D.C., which has its own unique governance issues going on. And I felt like I knew that so well. And then I got to New York and I'm like, okay, I feel like I am just brand new to civics and politics here. But yeah, I think there's nothing that can beat really getting involved at the grassroots and the local level, learning about your community, learning all of the support groups that are there, people that have been doing this for a long time. So I highly encourage that as well.
Thank you so much. And the last question for now is, this has always been a very hot button item in elections every single year, but this question has come up many times. What are the major challenges, in your opinion, with voter ID laws?
That's a really good question. League of Women Voters, we have a national policy. We are opposed to voter ID. And the reason is actually very simple. When a person registers to vote, they have to establish their identity. They have to share their last 4 digits of their social security number, or if they are a driver or if they have a non-driver ID, they have to share that number. Once a person does that and has an address, you have to have a mailing address. Once you do that, your identity is established. That's all you need. That's all you need. The idea of having to show identification when you vote is a form of voter suppression because it puts a barrier in front of people. If I live in a community and I don't have a driver's license, because why would I need a driver's license living in the city? Right away, it puts me at a disadvantage to go vote. And of course, we know that in many states, they're trying to create this idea of identification that becomes difficult to get and obtain. So the idea is that the League of Women Voters has always supported voting should be open, it should be accessible, whatever that means, from everything from handicap ramps to machines that can read for a person who is vision impaired, to a machine that can do anything to help you vote, anything at all to keep voting open, not closed.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I worked at the polling site in Manhattan for the general election, and I don't think you can have a better understanding of just how safe and secure the voting system is, because part of it getting to that, not having to show an ID, the way it works in New York City, and this was the role that I played in that election, was checking people in. So people would come in and they say, hi, I'm Jeremy Butler, I'm here to vote. Great, we've got it electronically, look you up, verify your address or something like that. Don't need to show ID or anything like that. But say, and this happens, I say, hey, I'm Jeremy Butler, here's my address. And they say, oh, that's interesting. It shows that you've actually already voted. Then that doesn't mean you're just turned away. You vote what's called a provisional ballot. I think it probably has different names in different parts of the city. And then that's flagged. And so what then the Bureau of Elections is going to do is going to, down the line, check to try and confirm which was the right ballot. Did you try to vote twice? Was someone mistakenly registered in as you? There are so many backup things to confirm that there is no voter fraud and things like that. That it really is an incredibly safe and secure system. And as Diane said, you are getting confirmed when you register to vote, and after that, it should be as easy as possible. Because another thing that you see is different states having very clear, at least in my opinion, very clear ways of trying to make it easier for some groups to vote and not for other groups to vote. And for instance, this has happened in states where your NRA card is good enough as an ID to vote, but a student ID is not. So your college ID doesn't qualify as a valid ID, but an NRA card does. To me, that shows an attempt to make it easier for one group to vote than another group to vote. So yeah, absolutely. Any barrier to voting is something we need to try and smooth out.
Right. I think another important factor in terms of how safe and secure elections are in New York is we still use a paper ballot. So you put it in the machine reads it, but that paper ballot is in the machine and it is sealed, it is locked. And if they have to be hand counted, it is easy to hand count them. So it's an absolute backup system. In some states, they're trying to do away with paper ballots, and we don't support that. We believe you have to have a paper ballot as a backup because that's another way to prove how fair and open and safe the elections are. Keep transparency, keep it so that everything can be seen.
Absolutely. And a reminder, anyone else with more questions, we still got another 12 or 13 minutes, so please throw your questions in there. I've got another sort of question topic to throw your way, Diane, because I think this is another important part about the importance of every vote. We talked about the fact that this is a primary election, and so I think something that many people realize or don't know is just how few people are actually driving the outcome of this election. So right now, especially here in New York City, which is a heavily Democratic city, the small number of people that are voting in this primary election are basically determining who is going to be the mayor. There's definitely Republican candidates running. There's going to be a general election, but for the most part, whoever wins the primary is going to become, whoever wins the Democratic primary, I should say, is going to become the next mayor. Do you have any, I should have asked you this in advance because I'd be interested in the numbers, but what are the general turnout rates for the Democratic primaries or primaries in general, maybe compared to the general elections and things like that?
So as a elementary school retired teacher, I can use the very specific mathematical word, a lot less people. The primaries are horribly represented by voters. And it's really pretty embarrassing because everything you said was true. And it's really very embarrassingly low turnout. I don't have specific numbers, but it's really bad. By district, some of the districts could be 12% of eligible voters turning out. Interestingly, because New York State is a closed primary state, a person has to be a party member in order to even have the opportunity to vote in the primary. So, the League of Women Voters, we don't have a position on this in New York, but, many states have what they call open primaries where you just show up to vote in a primary and you could just take whatever ballot you want. If you want the Democratic ballot, you just say which one you want. Would that increase voter turnout? I don't know. I think that part of educating people to this idea that we've been talking about today about power and voice is to understand exactly what you said, Jeremy, that, in New York City, the fact of the matter is it's the primary that really matters. And to really try to increase turnout based on that knowledge and that understanding. But we have a long way to go. And frankly, we have a long way to go in general election turnout. New York State is among the lowest in terms of voter turnout, even in general elections, even in presidential years. And that's something, you know, as we say, it is really easy to register people to vote, really easy. But getting them to actually vote leads to really a very strong conversation that I tried to share with you earlier about the compelling reasons why people need to vote. And we have to really reach out to people and find out what is the compelling reason why certain people will vote when other people won't. And how do we reach people in every corner of this city and every corner of this country with compelling reasons so that they understand why they have to vote.
Absolutely. And I think it's, I think it's two things. I'm glad you touched on the open primaries, so I want to come back to that. But then I think it's also just incredibly important, kind of like with everything, the more, you know, everybody individually kind of reaches out to their own community group and tries to encourage voting at that level, that's probably our best bet to increasing turnout. You know, it's great that the Bureau of Elections and organizations like yours and ours does these events, but that's probably not going to ultimately get to really that groundswell of people that we need to turn out. And that's from, you know, people that are voting saying, hey, you know, to your friends, to your colleagues, you know, you should vote. The primary elections are coming up, you know, they're happening now, and encourage people to get out there and vote because they are incredibly important. And then to your point, you know, there was a story on NPR this morning, and again, this is a very small focal group, but it had someone on that tried to go vote in the primary, but he is a registered independent, and he got to the polling location and was turned away, and he said he didn't realize it. He understands it, but he didn't realize that because he's not a registered Republican or Democrat, he can't vote in the primary. And so I think ultimately, you know, open primaries would increase the turnout. I'm personally a big proponent of open primaries. I think it's one of those things that we need to be embracing across the country.
And I think that people's frustration with parties, you know, we try to explain to people, because we're a nonpartisan organization, but we try to explain to people that, yes, you might be totally frustrated with the parties in this country, but if you want your voice heard, you have to join one, at least in New York, in order for your voice to be heard. So even if you don't like it, do it so that you get to vote in a primary so your voice is there.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned, you know, some of the turnout here locally isn't very good in general. And this kind of came up, I think, in some of these statewide debates about changing voter rules and stuff like that. Do you think New York City, New York State could do things to improve its election process? Are there improvements that need to be made locally?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we're advocating for, and it's actually going to be on the November ballot as a ballot initiative, is same-day voter registration. That if you're living in New York and you know what, for whatever reason, you just never quite got around to filling in the paperwork to register to vote, why can't you just register that day? Again, it's the same, you have to prove it the same way. And if it comes through and it's proved, then your vote will count. Having kind of no fault voter registration where it's automatic. Anybody who gets a driver's license, anybody who gets any form of ID in the city should automatically be a registered voter. Right now, the process is ridiculous. It's a paper form. You can't even do it online unless you have a driver's license. You have to get the paper form, fill it out with a black pen, you don't have to put a stamp on it. That's the only good thing, and mail it in. You know, you tell a young person that, they look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean? Why can't I do it on my phone? And, you know, so that's a huge impediment, being able to make voter registration super simple. And then make it so that the polls are open longer. I mean, early voting was an initiative that we really pushed. It's great. Why not extend the hours? Making people vote where they live, obviously it's because that's where you're represented, but we also have the ability now, as we do for the early balloting, to print a ballot at the poll site, which is what we do for early voting. Why not make that citywide? Why can't I be working, you know, if I work in Manhattan, but I live in the Bronx and I don't get off of work till 9 o'clock at night and I'm not going to make it home in time to vote. Why can't I vote near where I work? But they'll print me a ballot representing my district. Right now, you cannot do that. You have to make it home, which is where early voting helps, of course, because you have 9 days to get to the polls. But, you know, why not do what we do with early voting? So I think there are certainly things now with technology that it's like, well, why aren't we doing it this way?
Absolutely. No, completely agree. One other thing, we only got a few minutes left. I want to be, gracious of everyone's time, and we certainly appreciate your time. One thing I do want to circle back in is, what do you think is going to be the timeline for getting results from this election? I've heard that because of the ranked choice voting, we shouldn't expect, results to be coming out the day of the actual election on June 22nd.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that because that's a really important question. We are going to have to be super patient. Super patient. Remember, in New York, they will not count absentee voting until all the absentee ballots come in. And remember, you can postmark your absentee ballot on election day. So you got to wait 7 days for that. Military overseas ballots have another week to come in. So actually, we have been told by the Board of Elections that the total number of ballots that come in, all the absentee ballots, all the overseas military ballots, all of that won't be counted, won't be started to be counted until 2 weeks after. So that brings us to right after 4th of July weekend, Tuesday, July 6th. So there will be one round of ranked choice voting will be run, a preliminary round 1 week after the election. So that's June 29th. And then the second round will run with all the absentee ballots added in July 6th. So, and then we'll see. But I would say be patient, patient, patient. It's going to be at least 2 weeks plus for some races. Now, some races might be able to declare right away.
That's a good point. Yeah, I guess, the mayor race might take the ranked choice voting rounds, but some of the races might be decided right off the bat. That is a very good point. Outstanding. Now, this has been incredibly helpful and entertaining and certainly informative. So thank you, Diane, for your time and your knowledge. Victor, any last second questions we have? I don't want to cut stuff off, but I know we're running low on time.
No, sir, that's it.
All right, outstanding. Well, again, Diane, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any closing comments or anything that we didn't touch on that you want folks to know?
I would just say, just think about the power you have as a voter. Think about the power you have for your voice to be heard and use your voice. You have things to say, you have things you believe in, use your voice.
Outstanding. I couldn't say it better. Thank you so much again, Diane, and thank you everyone that tuned in.
Take care now.
All right, bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.